Good evening again. Jeff Polman here with the second of three pre-readings from my upcoming novel, Red Jacarandas, to be published on January 11th. It is weird tales of Los Angeles horror in the supernatural and suspense vein. And for my second story, it is actually the novel in the middle of the book called One Eye Open. And it's about Leo, who is a Los Angeles homeless guy who's in his late 30s, but he's been homeless for so long he's almost forgotten what his life was like before he was homeless. Leo also has psychic abilities, which gets him embroiled in this recent incident where a woman died, and he's seeing psychic visions and having nightmares because apparently there are some entities that are trying to reach out to him and he's not sure why. Anyway, about halfway through the story, he finds himself on Skid Row, downtown Los Angeles, because he was mugged in Hollywood and tried to get help at an emergency room hospital in East Hollywood and created a scene there. He doesn't have any insurance and was dumped by a couple of rogue paramedics in the middle of Skid Row, downtown LA. So this is from chapter 11 of One Eye Open. The sticky, warm air thickened. I thought I saw a lightning flash, then heard a rumble and knew I was right. I would have to find shelter soon, but was weak and thirsty and had double blisters and knew I could end up in a piss-filled doorway if I wasn't careful. My first plan had been to scrounge up change and call Ruby. Now I'd settle for any kind of roof. I found a half-eaten chicken breast in a Pollo Loco bag, but it tasted like a salty shoe and made me gag. Rinsed my mouth with the warm, watery remnants of a fast food soda cup, then found myself on 7th Street, which was far less teeming than San Julian, but no more safe. There was another liquor store or two, a couple of bars, the same shady hodgepodge of characters, but also more homeless camped out for the night, and a fair amount of peace being kept. I saw another hooker, this one Latino and younger than the first, exit a portisan behind a sheepish, long-haired businessman, sipping up his fly. A decrepit brick structure called Hotel Clifford had become a flophouse, lost residents perched on its front steps, fire escapes in its open windows, scratching arms or regaling the night with their blatherings. Another lightning flash lit up the sky, was followed by a sooner and louder rumble. I felt rain spitting on my head, hurried across to the endless line of homemade shelters, hoping for a tiny, unoccupied space between cardboard, maybe even an invite from one good soul. But this was a tightly packed collection of filth and human cordwood with no entry point in sight. Then the rain spits became gobs, and a bank of rogue clouds opened. Howls and curses filled the air, and the stretch of sidewalk campers compressed and folded in like dark red rose petals at dusk. I was soaked in seconds and ducked down a side street. Every doorway was filled with limbs or unfriendly eyes. At the corner, 3 drunks fought over space inside a dumpster. If I paused for 5 seconds, piss and rotten French fries would wash over my shoes, so I kept moving. The Los Angeles River was nearby, that much I knew, and with the river came storm drains and overpasses. I crossed 8th Street, avoided the splash of a passing cab, and headed toward a distant spot where the buildings seemed to drop away. Another flop house appeared on my right, Kelvin Castle, this one bigger and sadder, filled with pale faces gazing out its broken windows. One of the inhabitants on the 2nd floor whistled and waved me up, a lit cigarette stuck to his lip. I hesitated, then darted up the building steps and through the open front door. It was incredibly dark inside and smelled worse than death, but it was dry. Doomed, motionless men and a few women watched me mount the stairs, which were rotting away and mined here and there with collapsing boards. The guy with the cigarette sat in the window of the first room, surrounded by a dozen silent, drifting roommates. I walked over, avoiding a large hole in the floor. The guy had an old-fashioned butch haircut and wore a torn, soiled cowboy shirt. The right side of his face was covered in soot or grease. It was too dark to tell. He nodded at me with a tiny smile, as if recognizing an old friend. "Just so you know, it wasn't my cigarette." "What's that?" He leaned forward, plucked the butt off his lip, and held it aloft. "I had one just like this, but so did Stinky, and he's the idiot who slept on newspapers." "Not that night," echoed a pathetic voice behind them. "You sure goddamn did." I was already backing away. "Hey, I have no idea what this is about." "You do now," said the guy, and the right side of his face exploded in flame. I shouted, leapt back. Fire licked around the walls, ignited every resident in sight. Awful screams pierced through my head, and I turned, fell through the floor, and landed face first on a wet, grassy mound, each of my knees in a separate puddle. The building had vanished around me. "Have some respect, dumbass!" A foot slammed into my thigh. I rolled over, caught a glimpse of an old homeless guy wearing an egg carton hat, pointing at something. I peeled myself off the mound, saw that a plaque had been screwed into it. "In memory of the 46 wayward souls who perished in the Kelvin Castle fire, July 7th, 1953. Horror seized my throat. I got to my feet, slipped on the wet grass, tumbled back, and flattened another man's sheet-draped dwelling. The man squirted out of it like paste from a tube, half-naked, wild-eyed. He swung at my head with a large chair leg. "Hey, I'm sorry," I yelled, but a line of death had apparently been crossed. The man charged me again and again. Other homeless were there, but no one intervened, and a few urged on the leg swinger. I tried to grab hold of the weapon, but the man was quick and landed a blow in my side. Winded, I fell off the curb, waited for 2 pairs of headlights to approach, then darted in front of the cars. My attacker froze on the curb, raised the chair leg, and howled in twisted triumph. I took the nearest alley and paused under a fire escape to inspect the latest wound. The chair leg had a splintered end, and that put a long, ugly scratch in my side next to the bruise the blow had made. It stung like a paper cut, and when I dropped my shirt again, I sank to the wet pavement in utter hopelessness. How could God have let me sink this low? True, I wasn't a famous believer in the big guy, but there were certainly forces in nature. There was karma, and even though I'd forgotten the better life I must have had once, I knew I was still good in this one, that I cared for others, that I appreciated the small blessings I occasionally received, the hummingbird I saw once drinking out of a backyard swimming pool. What did I ever do or say to bring me to this torturous moment? Okay, so that's the second one. Next week I'll be back with the third and final pre-reading, and it's from the second screenplay in the rear of the book called Loved Ones. Until then, have a good week.